Science fiction writer Harley Ellison has estimated there are only 5 fictional creations known in practically every part of the Earth: Tarzan, Sherlock Holmes, Mickey Mouse, Robin Hood, and Superman. These characters are some of the most well known due to their worldwide reach, but also due to the adaptations and canonicity that link their characters back to the original source material. All these highlighted top 5 have been adapted in some form to meet the needs for production. Robin Hood, for example, was a legendary heroic outlaw in the 13th and 14th century that began appearing in folklore and then literature, and his story has been adapted hundreds of times with differing opinion on Robin Hood's moral code. But who out of these top 5 am I going to analyse? Well, most people know who Superman is, or at least what he looks like, as he's one of the most well-known superheroes adapted from comic books and made into films, TV series and toys. His iconic costume paired with his high moral values make him one of the most compassionate superheroes in the modern day, even if some filmmakers are attempting to change it slightly. Superman's story is well known, but for few who have less of an idea of who he is, I try to explain his backstory very briefly. He was born on the planet Krypton and flew to Earth to escape his homeworld's destruction, and he arrived at Earth when he was only a child, and learned that Earth's atmosphere enabled him to do more than any other human. He has abilities that coincide with his name as they are supernatural, and he can lift objects with huge atomical mass, he can shoot directional lasers from his eyes, and is also able to fly without additional equipment. Although Superman has many advancements, he has 2 main weaknesses: Lois Lane, his persistent love interest, and kryptonite, a material from his homeworld that makes him the same as us, the Homo sapiens. Kryptonite looks a little bit like this, and appears in several of Superman's stories, limiting his power and changing the dynamic between villains and heroes. Superman always needs binary opposition to propel his story forward by giving the narrative reason to exist, and throughout his time as a superhero, he has fought many villains, but the 2 most notable, a billionaire psychopath Lex Luthor, and a homeworld criminal called General Zod. Superman's story appears in modern pop culture, but where did Superman's original story start? The story of Superman began in June 1938 when he appeared in Action Comics #1. His story was simple: fight superpowered villains that mere mortal Earthlings could not handle. The first issue of Action Comics, released quietly, became a huge success, and Superman began to appear in a wider number of stories designed by the team of artists and storywriters. They developed his origin story, his lifestyle, and the villains that he encountered, and Action Comic #1 was deemed a success. However, the cover was seen to be outlandish due to the nature of a man violently lifting a car and throwing it into the ground. This gained huge negative traction, making the publisher refuse to include him, Superman, on their covers for quite some time. He eventually reclaimed the spotlight as poster boy for Action Comics and captivated the hearts of many, no matter their age. The era of superheroes had begun, but it was about to face its biggest struggle: the war. The stories had had a huge uptake during the wartime, as they were used as a form of escapism for the devastation that people were currently facing. The bright printing allowed for a huge depth of colour, a change from the black and white prints of newspapers. However, after the war, the superhero genre lost steam, making many consider that to be the end of the Golden Age. The era itself, though, left a huge mark on comic books, with many of the characters remaining popular in today's current climate. The first mainstream superhero, Superman, is still relevant today, and adaptations continue to thrive. Current copies of the first comic book have even sold for $3.2 million, a damn sight more than the 10 cents cost listed on the cover. But why are they worth so much? The original owners of the Superman character sold their rights to Detective Comics Incorporated, the company which was to become DC Comics, of course, for only $130. They continued to work on the character under the new branding, but lost out on a huge sum of money. DC enabled the Superman character to become part of the new DC Extended Universe, but the original creators feel like they have lost out on the work they supposedly own. But undoubtedly, that $130 check created a billion-dollar industry and set out in motion nearly 70 years of legal battles that continue to this day. The history of Superman for comic book lovers may be clean-cut, but legal backgrounds to characters get complicated when faced with IP arguments. With this, I want to turn to adaptations. What ones are around and how good are they? Superman's brand and the way he's been presented in popular culture has changed over the years, with shifts in what it means to be the hero. When I was growing up, there were iterations of Superman that gave him differing backstories, changing people's perception of who Superman was. The three main versions of Superman in live-action film provide a stage for comparative analysis, and the films are Superman 1, the 1978 version, Superman Returns, the 2006 failed reboot, and the current adaptation featuring Henry Cavill. Each film has a different actor playing Superman, and shifts the story to fit the plot. Romagnoli and Pagnocchi argue that the comic book reboots have led to a shift in character stories, and feel that at some stage the source material becomes too dense for the casual reader or viewer to consume. They argue that there is a jumping on point in comic books and films where previous content streams do not relate to current media, thus limiting people's comprehension of the story. This can be seen in Snyder's adaptation of Superman's character, as one needs to understand the crisis that Cavill's portrayal is facing. Donner and Singer's adaptation, on the other hand, features a more simplistic story with more emphasised property and character functions, as well as Torodov's narrative arc theory. This shows a clear change in the types of films we are willing to consume in the modern day, as we seek more complex storylines and deeper narratives. In the pursuit of more accessible content, superhero franchise adaptations may be the future of the comic book genre. Former Spider-Man editor Danny Fingertooth describes comic books as the pastime of a rarefied audience, whose steadily declining sales will see them absent from our shelves. And I agree with this statement to an extent, as we can see cross-platform media beginning to take over popular culture. But I feel that adaptations will reflect and link back to the source material, making comic books increasingly more justified. The style of adaptation and audience reception shows how dynamic this market for adaptation is. Smith argues that younger audiences in today's world would favour adaptation that's been created within their lifetime, as it has a more impactful written story. And stories have changed, but so has the technology and the things that can be shown on screen, and they've enabled us to visualise even more. But even if this is the case, I still feel that previous adaptations, however old they are, provide clarity and significance to the history of a hero. Adaptations express each story in differing ways, but do any of these stories actually have any canonicity? Canonicity in film and television is very different from its literary counterpart. For example, there is no question in which Sherlock Holmes stories are canonical. Those written by Doyle are, and everything else is not. Television and film canonicity works slightly differently, as there are many authors involved. Works not officially sanctioned are generally outside of canonicity, but what remains inside is more unclear. Officially licensed material, novelizations and tie novels are not usually considered canonical, and even broadcast material can be excluded from canonicity when decreed by the word of God. If I were to form an adaptation of the Superman franchise and create my own motion picture, I would not only be breaching the copyrighted material, but my work would not be deemed as official canon. This means that anyone is able to make an adaptation of a character they would like. However, unless decreed by the word of God, the work will not be backed or supported by the studio. The argument of canonicity within film becomes more increasingly complex when looking at the Superman franchise. The most prominent example of select canonicity is featured in Superman Returns, where Singer decided to only make use of events from Superman 1 and 2 as a backstory for his new character. And this split fans in half, as they wanted a true reboot, but it was more like a reboot follow-on film. In an interview with AICN, Singer noted, "It's a return story, it puts the films in a kind of vague history, so what it doesn't do is tread over the 1978 Richard Donner film, it doesn't tread over Smallville." Superman Returns was a box office success, but many fans feel that the adaptation came short of their expectations. Delaney breaks down the failures of Superman Returns and explains what went wrong. He notes, "The movie did not prove worth the wait and left fans wanting more. Superman Returns was canon to the original two films, but it was a sole version with no follow-on films as well." And what is and what is not canonicity is a question asked throughout Superman's comic book creation, but less so concerning the film franchises. Comic book canon is complex as there are hundreds of interwoven stories, with some that are never ending. But film canon is easier to understand, as the studios license material to be used, but even current canonicity questions are being posed. With the recent release of Zack Snyder's Justice League, fans have asked what versions of Superman's character will be canon. Snyder stated, "This isn't controversial, but this film, My Justice League, is not canon. Canon for Warner Bros. Is a Joss Whedon version of Justice League." And this shows that even if there are multiple versions of a film that provide differing endings or stories, the studio must decide which film they will use as a basis for projects going forward. Canonicity for Superman within film is fairly easy to explore when looking at things with the hand of God. But what do I think of Superman's adaptations and canonicity? stories of superheroes are becoming ever more adapted into film and television, and the conversion of physical media to an all-digital way of life has led to a drop in the number of books and novels. We are set to see an exponential growth in the numbers of adaptations, but when does the market get too saturated and complex? I feel that adaptations are key in expanding the number of people that can see or consume a character's story, but worry that with the increase in adaptations will make it harder for the everyday consumer to understand storylines and settings. Some studios are attempting to streamline their adaptations and force canonicity onto their viewers by choosing films with the word or hand of God. This causes gender imbalances, as many studios are prioritising their male characters over their female versions, as they are easier to market to the standard consumer. Does this mean that my favourite adaptations should just disappear, as they are no longer canon to these new rebooted characters, or will the history of a hero still be relevant? I've been a fan of Superman's story for as long as I can remember, and always worry that with constant reboots we are going to lose the origins of this well-loved hero. Superman's story started in 1938, but for how many years are we going to see adaptations? After all, he is very easy to adapt in the modern day, but why aren't studios focusing more efforts on different characters? My Superman, the Superman that I suggest everyone to see, is Christopher Reeves' adaptation. The storyline may be simple and slightly corny, but for me and many others, his portrayal is as close to the original comics as it can be. I hope that in a world of transmedia, people will not forget the history of film, even if it is not current canon. And I finish this essay with one simple question: why is Superman so influential?